I'm Ken Adkins. I'm a graduate student here at CGU, and I will be your male Mormon millennial moderator for this panel. And we have a great lineup of scholars here. First, we'll be hearing from John Bartkowski, who is a professor of sociology at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He's the author of The Arc of Faith-Based Initiatives, Religion's Changing Role in Welfare Service Provision, as well as various books and articles on religion, gender, family, and social welfare. His most recent lines of work examine the religious lives of Latter-day Saint youth in a nearly completed book, as well as Hawaiian Mormonism. He regularly serves as an evaluator on federal and foundation grants and designed to enhance the capacity and performance of nonprofit and faith-based organizations. After which we'll hear from Benjamin Noll, who is the John Marshall Harlan Associate Professor of Politics at Centre College in Danville, Kentucky. He is a political scientist who specializes in American public opinion and voting behavior, specifically in the fields of religion and politics, race, ethnicity, and politics. Along with Dr. Jana Reese, he is the co-director of the Next Mormon Survey, and along with Cami Jo Bolin, is the co-author of She Preached the Word, Women's Ordination in Modern America. After Dr. Noll, we'll be hearing from Phil Zuckerman, who is a professor of sociology at Pitzer College and the founding chair of the nation's first secular studies program, and the author of The Non-Religious, Living the Secular Life, Faith No More, and Society Without God. He is also the editor of several volumes, including the Oxford Handbook of Secularism and the Social Theory of W.E.B. Du Bois, and he blogs for Psychology Today, and lives here in Claremont with his wife and 3 children. We'll now turn the time over to John Bartkowski.
Good morning, afternoon, or whatever, depending on your time zone. So I have deliberated over whether I should have speaking notes, other types of things, PowerPoint presentation, pictures of baby hippos. I decided against all of it. So this is going to be the equivalent of me bearing my academic testimony to you all. So prepare. It's going to be a little bit of an adventure. Okay. The first thing image I'd like to fix in your mind is of me sitting on a stationary bicycle. You might wonder, what does that have to do with the Next Mormons, or as I refer to it, the Book of Jana? I really am delighted to have seen this book from its infancy, because I will admit that I was a reviewer at Oxford University Press when I first saw this manuscript. So I've been able to see it develop, grow, mature. It was as good in its original form, I would say, as it is now, but it's also nice to see the kind of the arc or the trajectory of a volume as it kind of flourishes and grows into full form. So, and I feel better for having admitted that I was a reviewer of the book to the group, so I appreciate the affirmation there from you all. But, because usually those are the kind of things we keep quiet in academic circles, right? So the image of me sitting on a stationary bicycle is every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at UTSA, I will hike it over to the UTSA Recreational Sports Center, and I am part of a spin class. Spin class has nothing to do with dancing, for those of you who don't know what that involves. It actually involves sitting on a bike and pedaling your heart out, actually, for roughly an hour or so, with some mindfulness meditation in between. I'm still not sure if that's a spiritual practice or not. We'll turn to Phil to let us know whether that's something that is spiritual or religious, or just some kind of interesting cultural integration into a stationary bike cycling class. The reason I mentioned the spin class is because I've been doing that for about 6 months now, and for the first 3 months, you were pretty much alone on your bike, and if there were images flashed before you, those images were of, landscape or other type of scenery that was supposed to mimic the experience of riding a bicycle outside. But in the last 3 months or so, the bikes were changed out, and every bike was connected through computer technology that I don't fully understand to the screen that is before you in the front of the class. And actually, your bike number is able to be shown on that screen in a race with your colleagues, fellows, other people in the class. And that is what is called a leaderboard, okay? So now the teacher of this class or the instructor of the class is very careful to say, if this is something that helps you or if you're competitive, feel free to pay attention to the leaderboard. If it's not something you like, just disregard it, okay? So that actually just kind of sets the stage for what I'd like to talk about today and kind of build some connections to this wonderful book, The Next Mormons. One of the things that I found most intriguing in the book are some of the vignettes or the stories that people tell of leaving the faith. And there are many, but one of them actually, to which I will point, let's see here, is it really starts on page 223, and there is a young man named Michael who talks about why he left the faith. Michael is gay, so on the face of it, one could understand why he experienced some discomfort in an LDS congregation in the LDS faith tradition. But there are actually smaller vignettes that are just alluded to, and then there's a kind of quick move past those of experiences that people had of what many devout Mormons would call being offended, but I would say is just outright offensive behavior on some occasions. And that is often public correction, public shaming, public humiliation, however well intended, that if not caused, could at least be correlated, shall I say, with these people exiting the faith. And what I'd like to do is propose that, and this is after reading Jana's book, so these comments are really inspired by her book, is propose that there is something that we can call, like my spin class, leaderboard Mormonism, okay? And what I would say are the hallmarks of leaderboard Mormonism are first, that it is public. In other words, it is a collective social accomplishment, okay? I would also add, in leaderboard Mormonism, you probably don't have the choice to disregard the leaderboard, as my spin instructor would say. If this is unhelpful to you, disregard it. Secondly, in addition to it being public, leaderboard Mormonism is hierarchical. So it emphasizes status differentials between persons or between groups of people. Thirdly, leaderboard Mormonism is ritualized. In other words, it is embedded and diffused through ceremonies, habits, and taken for granted assumptions. Now, there's a famous sociologist named Harold Garfinkel who actually, in this part of the country, made his claim to fame in a school of thought called ethnomethodology, sometimes derided as California sociology, but I really liked it and like it. And he talked about degradation ceremonies. In other words, these are ritualized acts through which some people are elevated, but more importantly for Garfinkel, some people are denigrated. And what I would say actually is that there are many, many aspects of Mormonism that are affirming of people, that are full of compassion, caring, mercy, and those sorts of laudable traits. But there are also aspects or cultural threads within the LDS context, and it's really the leaderboard Mormonism that I'm talking about, that do not have these positive qualities associated with them. And I guess one of the things that I would make the case for, and that I do try to make the case for in a book that I'm writing, is that a lot of Mormon ritualistic behavior or if you will, kind of some of the ceremonies that we talk about are not so much degradation ceremonies as they are adulation ceremonies. In other words, efforts to recognize the accomplishments of people. So these are actually really, really prevalent in young men's and young women's programs, whether it's a personal progress award or progress through duty to God or other types of things that are really designed to shape and mold young people into devout adult Mormons. So I want to recognize the positive qualities of that from the outset here. But I also want to say that I feel like the adulation ceremonies have an ugly underside potentially, and those could be degradation ceremonies. Again, sometimes they're not even intended. In fact, they're just plain old not intended that way, but you know what they say about good intentions. If I have to fill that in for you, if I have to fill that in for you, I don't want to use the word hell from the pulpit, I mean podium today. So what I'd like to do actually is just kind of end by reading a vignette from the book that I'm writing that tells a story of a young woman who experienced one of these, I would call them a degradation ceremony, although again, it was not intended as such. Lisa quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Sister Milton had not drawn her name from the seminary fishbowl. For today, at least, Lisa had dodged the bullet of public humiliation. Before school each morning, Lisa attended seminary with other young people in her ward. In years past, seminary students were expected to attend the 50-minute early morning class each weekday before school and study the lesson together on the spot. Under that old system, an unspoken bargain of sorts had been struck. The teacher was charged with carefully studying and preparing the lesson in advance. The teacher was able to lead the class through the morning lesson. The students' part of this bargain entailed awakening earlier than most of their peers each school day, and as called upon, participating in the morning group scripture study by reading a verse here or there. And when invited or inclined to do so, students could share their thoughts during the lesson. Lisa recalled hearing about seminary from her older siblings. She had looked forward to attending when she was young. Strong friendships were often formed among seminary students. There was an esprit de corps that emerged among those who dragged themselves out of bed at 5 a.m. for those Monday through Friday classes. And a lot was learned in this 4-year immersion in all 4 major works that compose the LDS scriptural canon. When coupled with Sunday school classes and young men's and young women's meetings that occurred every Sunday, not to mention the midweek mutual events, seminary ensured that young Mormons would grow up with every opportunity to learn what they believed and why. Lisa understood seminary's importance. Ward leaders stressed it, and for the vast majority of parents, attendance was non-negotiable. Students wanting to attend BYU were required to graduate from seminary. However, Lisa's seminary experiences had not mirrored those of her older siblings. Students were now expected to read the lesson, or at least the scripture verse associated with it, each night before seminary. The more relaxed just show up system of the past had been thrown overboard for Elevate Learning. The new Elevate Learning regime seemed to be working for some students who were diligent about their scripture reading, but thus far it was a dead end for Lisa. Each day, students were held accountable for their reading habits by signing a scripture study tracking sheet. And that tracking sheet indicated whether or not they had read their scriptures the night before. This sheet was passed around class for all students to sign and for everyone's eyes to see. Lisa was not an avid scripture reader. Her family read scriptures with her each night, but she personally never really caught the vision. She wasn't even sure if she believed all this stuff about modern-day prophets, golden plates, and other Mormon peculiarities. And now it was all there in black and white. Lisa's fellow students could readily discern her lack of scripture reading enthusiasm from the long series of blank spaces adjacent to her name on the tracking sheet. Lisa wasn't proud of her record, but she didn't want to be forced into reading her scriptures either, and she certainly wasn't going to lie about it. That would just feed this coercive system. As an additional incentive for nightly scripture study, Sister Milton had recently brought a transparent fishbowl to class. Within the bowl were paper paper cutout fish with each student's name on a cutout. Because the bowl was transparent, each student was constantly reminded of the prospect that his or her name could be selected from the bowl. A fish in a bowl is, after all, under a magnifying glass. When a student's name was picked from the bowl, that student was expected to recount a scriptural verse he or she had read the previous evening. If the student had not completed the assigned reading, the alternatives were unpleasant. Students who did not read were expected to admit before the whole class that they had not completed the reading. As Lisa recalled Sister Milton explaining, "I'm not trying to embarrass you into reading your scriptures." Well, okay, I guess I am trying to embarrass you, but it's only because I love you and want you to read your scriptures. Seeing the students' displeasure with this system, Sister Milton gave students who had not completed their nightly reading the opportunity to find a scripture verse on the spot if they admitted to having not completed their nightly assignment. Some mercy, thought the group of students who bristled under this system. Students who rifled through their scriptures or fumbled with their smartphone scripture apps, desperately searching for a verse when they hadn't read, were greeted with deafening silence as onlookers waited for them to pluck a scripture verse from somewhere. Lisa and many of her friends bristled at the punitive approach used against those who did not read. Sister Milton's supervisor seemed to approve of this particular expression of love for her students, and given the tracking the church required of her, maybe she was just doing her job. But for their part, several of the students thought that this was one kind of love they could do without. In fact, once it was clear that the fishbowl would be a permanent fixture in seminary class, the students' esprit de corps turned into a coup d'etat. One morning, when Sister Milton had stepped out of class, Becky, who hated the frickin' fishbowl as much as Lisa did, quickly stepped forward. Becky removed her name and Lisa's from the fishbowl. Upon seeing Becky's bold move, James and Aaron nearly simultaneously asked Becky, "Psst, take out my name." Becky was more than happy to comply, but this collective uprising was not to be without reprisal. One day later, Sister Milton recognized that the fishbowl was much more empty than normal. 4 years of teaching early morning seminary, and Sister Milton had never before confronted such rebellion. She mustered up the smidgen of mercy her anger afforded her. She explained that any students who had removed their fish cutout names from the fishbowl would have the opportunity to place their names back in the bowl after class when she had left. However, she also explained in no uncertain terms that any student who failed to reinstate their fish cutout names in the fishbowl on their own would face an unhappy consequence. Sister Milton would add each of the missing names back into their fishbowl fivefold. Oh well, as the scripture mastery verse from Alma says, wickedness never was happiness. And that's Alma 41:10 for those of you keeping score at home. Attempted mutiny required a firm hand and determined reprisal. And after all, the students would ultimately grow to love reading the scriptures, wouldn't they? Thank you very much.
All right. As was introduced, I am Benjamin Noll from Center College in Danville, Kentucky. It's good to be here today, and thanks for everyone for coming out and showing interest. What I wanted to do is focus a little bit more in my capacity as a political scientist to show the political context under which a lot of these things that we've been talking about are taking place, relate them to things that other people have been talking about today, as well as things that will be presented later on with that. Also, I want to start with some pieces of information that perhaps don't fit as well with a lot of the things that we've been talking about so far. With this survey that we've done that Jana's written up into this fantastic book, we'll notice in there are a lot of stories about people who have, for one reason or another, stepped away, or for people who don't fit the mold in one way or another. And those are all true and correct. This survey is also showing us, and as the book will attest to, that the majority of millennial Latter-day Saints think very positively about their faith community. As Becca showed us with the Mormon Millennials, they tend to show up to church at similar rates as older people there. in our survey, we asked a question that I don't think made it into the book here, but it was very revealing. It asked people to say on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you will remain a faithful member for the rest of your life? With 10 being, I'm 100% confident, there's no way I would ever be anything but, and 1 being, yeah, I'm pretty sure today's my last day, kind of a thing. So when looking at those who are members, can we guess what the average was here? It's very high. Like 9 to 10 is like where 80% of everyone in here is. There were a few who put something closer to a 6 or a 7, and very, very few who are saying anything at like 5 or below. Most of the members of the church in our survey, and even the millennials, are thinking positively about their faith tradition, and they have every intention of staying there and participating and continuing to enjoy and contribute to the community. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're hearing the stories about disaffiliation and about people who are unsatisfied, because those are all true as well. But it's also important to know that there's this other side too, and that's an important part of the life of the church. So what I want to do then is get to how can we explain this, and how might it make sense within the context of some of these other surveys and such. So to do this, I want to put forth a question, and it's a question that I do not have a ready answer to. But it occurred to me today, as well as things that have led up to this, thinking about on all of these surveys, whether it be the Pew surveys or the ones that we've been doing, we're defining Latter-day Saints not as people who have an official membership record in Salt Lake City on the church rolls, but rather does someone self-identify as LDS? When they're asked, what is your religion? Is that what they say? With the Next Mormon survey, we had a question right up at the beginning. Do you currently identify as a member of the LDS church? And we had some follow-up questions about whether they were converts or not, or whether they formerly identified, et cetera, et cetera. As those who are familiar with the LDS church and its administrative well knows, there are a lot of people on the records who have not been there for 20, 30, 50 years. If you were to see them on the street, they would not say or identify or have much of anything. They could include people who were perhaps born in the church, but their family stopped going when they were 2 years old, and their membership records are just simply on there. So it occurs to me that when we're asking surveys about people's religious identities and making comparisons across religious groups, what are the things going on in people's mind when they choose to identify as a Latter-day Saint or not? One hypothesis is that the reason that we see such high levels of happiness and satisfaction in the LDS church is simply because there's not as much of a space within LDS identity to express anything but high levels of satisfaction and happiness and certainty to stay. I'm thinking specifically in contrast to other Protestant denominations or Catholicism. Is there a space where people can say, yeah, I haven't been in 20 years, but yeah, I'm a Catholic, or I haven't been there, or I don't really believe anything in here, but sure, like I'm a Baptist, or whatever the case may be. Is there as much of a space for that within the LDS community? My strong hunch, based on anecdotal evidence, is no, but that's a hunch on my part, which is subject to further research before that can be confirmed. So to me, this helps explain how these two things are true at the same time. We do see people who identify as Latter-day Saints be very, very happy about that, and in general, very, very positive. But is it because that they're the people who feel comfortable expressing that identity? For those who don't, what's the boundary with which they then say, I'm dissatisfied enough that my community doesn't really own me anymore, so am I going to continue to own them? This is, again, a hypothesis that requires further testing, but this is one of my hunches as we're thinking about how to thread the needle between these things and explain how they simultaneously can both be true. So that's point one that I wanted to make. Point two is, part of this panel is responses, social science responses to the Next Mormon's book. So from my vantage point as a political scientist, of course, the chapter on Mormons and politics and social views was interesting. to say the least. And it fit very, very well within a lot of the existing sociological and political science work on the relationship between religion and politics in contemporary American society. And so I thought it would be helpful for just a minute to walk through what some of those major trends have been for the last several decades, and then to situate members of the church within those trends and see what that can help us better understand. So if you were to talk to people who are studying political behavior and the intersection of religion and politics back in the post-World War II era, in the 1950s, the variable that mattered is what religious tradition do you identify with? Are you a Protestant, a Catholic, or a Jew? Protestant, you're a Republican. Catholic and Jew, you're a Democrat. And that's how religion sorted political identity and communities in the 1950s. For a variety of reasons, including all the stuff that happened in the 1960s and then 1970s and so on and so forth, with the rise of the religious right in the 1980s and so on and so forth, that has shifted to where that variable of religious identity is no longer the key variable that sorts political identity and behavior in contemporary American society. Instead, and we've seen this up on the board in various other presentations, amongst those three B's of belonging, behavior, and belief, belonging, which religious affiliation you identify with, is less important now than the belief variable and the behavior variable. Those who are very orthodox in their religious beliefs, regardless of what those beliefs are and which tradition they are more likely in contemporary American politics now to identify as Republicans, and those who are less orthodox in those beliefs tend to identify as Democrats. Those who participate in religious communities much more frequently tend to identify now as Republican, and those who participate less so identify as Democrat. That's literally the opposite of how it was half a century ago. So within all of this that's happening, we want to get to this question that Jana brought up very beginning of the day. What is the, as we say, correlation and causation? Which way is that causal arrow going? What's driving this? And to what extent can Latter-day Saints be a case study in thinking about these wider things? So with this, as Jana pointed out, the conventional wisdom has always been, well, you have your religious beliefs first. Those are core and fundamental to a person's identity. And then the worldly identities, such as political community, would be secondary to that and downstream from that. That someone would pick their political policies and issues based on their core religious beliefs. That has just simply not been borne out by the research in American society over the last 50 to 60 years. People's political identities, looking whether cross-sectionally or with longitudinal data, are pretty core. I mean, we do know people probably who have switched parties at one point in their life or another, but those are the exceptions rather than the rule. Most people, once they get to their 20s, most of the time, lock in a political identity and pretty much keep it the rest of their lives. And then one of the big patterns in political science research right now is the extent to which that political identity then shapes literally everything else that you interact with in the world, all the way from what you think about current presidential candidates, all the way to the types of people that you want to hang out with on like a Saturday night at a restaurant. That political identity is a core sorting and organizing principle that then drives everything else, which we have seen includes then religious identity. When we compare that, like with the stuff that Becca was talking about and some others in terms of how many people have changed their religious identity in their life, it's a lot. Like nearly half of America says that they're identifying with something different than what they were when they were a kid. That changes much more frequently than partisan identity does. So those two things, we have that information to work with. We also have this within the survey itself. In the Next Mormon survey, about 2/3 of it for people who currently identify as members of the church, and about 1/3 were people who identify as former members of the church. When we look at that, the former members are much, much more likely to be Democrats than the current members. So again, it's the cause and effect thing. Is it because did they leave the church and thus because then they left or stopped identifying that they changed their perspectives on things and thus became more liberal? Or is it because they had these politically liberal social views and then changed their partisan identity? From the survey itself, because it was just a one snapshot at one point in time, we can't say definitively, but it does fit with that wider story, right? Plus, we can say these things. When asked of a variety of options why they left, as Jenna pointed out, a lot of the reasons they say they left have to do with political and social issues. When we look at stuff from the 2014 Pew Religious Landscape Survey, the people who say that they are something else now but were raised LDS, also more likely to be on the liberal side of the political social spectrum than those who were born members and stayed members. We can also look at research that I've done with my colleague Cami Jo Bolin, research on attitudes towards women's ordination in the United States. Contrary to what we ourselves were expecting, we thought that perhaps it would be religious views or perhaps demographics, gender, et cetera, those things were much less important than simple political identity in terms of who supports women's ordination in America. The strongest predictor is political partisanship, which suggests to us, once again, that politics is driving religion as opposed to the other way around. And then finally, I can add this anecdotal piece of information. We're focusing on a politically conservative religious institution and community in the United States, Latter-day Saints. I wanted to see if we were to look at it on the other side of the spectrum, would we see similar patterns? So I went back to the Pew Religious Landscape Survey, the 2014 version, and I thought to myself, okay, who are the Christians out there today who are on the complete opposite end of the spectrum? Episcopalians came to mind as being very politically liberal there, and there were enough of them in the survey to be able to do something with. So I did the same thing with them. Who are the people who are most likely to have left the Episcopal Church after having been born in it, and who are most likely to join it, just to see what the patterns are there? Those who were the most likely to have left the Episcopal Church are those who feel that there are clear standards of right and wrong in the world, as opposed to right and wrong depends on the context and situation, and those who are opposed to same-sex marriage. The Episcopal Church has clearly taken a stand that they are in favor of marriage equality and same-sex marriage, and so that suggested to me, well, there's something going on there. Perhaps they did not feel at home in an institution that takes a more cerebral kind of approach to spirituality and is always emphasizing that it's not so clear-cut all the time, that sometimes it's okay to have doubts and to think about these kinds of things, as well as being on the front lines of advocating for liberal sexuality issues and policies, et cetera, et cetera. Also, the people who are most likely to be a current Episcopalian after having converted from some other religious identity in their youth, the strongest predictor is those who support same-sex marriage. So I was looking at this, like, look at this. All the way here on the other end, you see politics also affecting affiliation trends in this particular religious institution that's on the other end in a counterpart way to how we see it going in, say, evangelical Christianity, as well as the LDS Church here. So none of these things, putting it together, I would say are firm, slam dunk evidence that it's politics that is driving this. But I don't think it's unreasonable to conclude either that this is a part of the story. All of these pieces of evidence together increase the confidence that there's something going on here and that it would be foolhardy to simply reject this as something that doesn't make one difference or another. So that's something to be thinking about with all of this here. Why are millennials tending to leave the LDS Church? One answer can be, well, younger people in general tend to be more liberal. Perhaps that has something to do with it. I think that is a key part of the story, but I also am not entirely persuaded that that's 100% of the story either, because when we look at the people who say they have left, and are no longer LDS, as Jenna pointed out, the median age is 19, and many of them left when they were teenagers, and that's actually before lots of, for most people, when their partisan identities really solidify in their lives. So a lot of this, to me, simply is just the life cycle effect of young people and adolescents oftentimes step away from organized religion for one reason or another, but then bringing in all this other stuff that we've been talking about in terms of with the life cycle effect, when people get married and start having kids, do they choose to come back in or not? The evidence to me, while not conclusively proving it, is also strongly suggestive that political identity and the polarization of it is a key part of the story that is necessary to help explain this narrative of what we've been talking about today. And with that, I conclude my remarks.
Thank you so much for inviting me. There you are. Hi. It may be apocryphal. I don't even know if it's true, but we often cite these studies in criminology where I've never actually seen one, but I love it anyway, where they look at the harshness of sentencing that judges mete out to people who have been found guilty just before lunch and the harshness of sentencing after lunch. And they always find that 11 to 12 o'clock hour is sort of the worst time to be sentenced by a judge. You're hungry, you're cranky, and that, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sentences get much lighter. You've got a full belly. So that's a way of saying I understand we're on the precipice of lunch. So I'll try to make my comments brief, and I may be a little bit more ornery because I haven't eaten, and I may be a little bit more snarky, and so on and so forth. So forgive me, it's that time. I have to say, I'm not by any means an expert on LDS life or community or experience. I study secularity and secularism, and so being at a Mormon Studies conference that feels exactly like a secular studies conference has been quite remarkable this morning. I'm just like, all the data, the rise of the nuns, apostasy, secular. I'm like, wow, okay. So feel right at home. And also, I learned something. I didn't know there would be coffee at a Mormon Studies conference. So thank you. I appreciate that. I just assumed I'd have to run somewhere, but there it was. Thank you. Okay. Fair enough. Appreciate it. I'd also like to say, maybe this is inappropriate. My wife told me it was, but oh well. I want to personally say a few words about Patrick. Patrick reached out to me many years ago, and we met for lunch, and I didn't think I would have anything in common with a historian, God help me, but let alone someone who's strongly involved in the LDS Church. And we've developed quite a nice friendship. We've served professionally on a lot of dissertation committees and qualifying exams, which is a really unique way to see how your colleagues think about issues, because it's a real discussion, it's critical, and so I've just developed tremendous respect for Patrick. I think he's the most brilliant colleague I've had here in 21 years at the Claremont Colleges, and I'm deeply sad to see him go. He's also just one of the most good-hearted people I know, so thanks, Patrick, and sorry to see you. And in fact, also, he keeps me honest. As someone who is secular and studies secular culture, it's very easy for us to demonize religious people, demonize religious, other groups that we just don't really know about. So anytime I want to write something critical of religion or LDS in particular, Patrick's face just starts to hover. I can't do that. Patrick's the greatest guy. So thank you. This may be a little all over the place. I, too, didn't want to have too much structure or didn't want to have a PowerPoint, so forgive me. I'll try to make things clear. And when I was in graduate school about 26 years ago, I remember running into one of my mentors, Marian Goldman, sociologist of religion at the U of O, and I just ran into her on campus one day, and she said, I just got off the phone with God. And I said, oh, that's interesting. How did that go? She's like, well, I was talking to Rodney Stark. Oh, so she's still alive, but his ideas aren't. But there was just kidding. There was love the camera. When I was in graduate school, there was a professor then at the University of Washington, I think now he's at Baylor, named Rodney Stark, and he was the leading sociologist of religion of the day, and we all were reading his books, and his thesis was pretty darn clear. Secularization was a myth purported by disgruntled Marxists and Freudians. There was no basis to it. Religion was stronger than ever. There were some odd exceptions in Europe, but you know how Europeans are. And in general, religion is moving forward stronger than ever, and secularization is in fact a myth. It's a lie. He wrote a famous article called Secularization Theory, Rest in Peace. And, as a young graduate student in the sociology of religion, I was like, oh, okay, well, interesting. And this is good stuff. And what was even sadder was he had all this data. I mean, he was an empiricist. So I don't know what to say, but 25 years later, you couldn't have been more wrong, Professor Stark. And I don't know if that says something bad about you or something bad about sociology. I just don't know if we should give up. But yeah, all indications show that religion's in decline in most parts of the world. There are a few countries where it's on the uptick for interesting reasons, which you can talk about. But on the 3 Bs, belief, behavior, and belonging, we're just seeing decline across the board all over the world, and dramatically so, right? We've never seen such a staggering shift like this. In 2016, National Geographic ran a cover story called "The World's New Religion: No Religion," right? Time Magazine ran a story, "The 10 Trends Shaping American Society and Changing American Society," and one of those top 10, I think number 6 or whatever, was the rise of the nuns. And not Sound of Music, but NONES. So we know this is happening. So what was really fascinating to me was to get this book and to see, wow, even in the LDS community, we're seeing signs of disaffiliation, dropout, not nearly as staggering as we've seen in the Catholic community in the last 30 years, or in obviously mainline Protestants, that are just shedding members. But still, to see it in that community was quite interesting to me as a sociologist of religion and someone who's also interested in secularity and secularization and so on and so forth. So just to be very clear, Dr. Reese, awesome book. Fantastic. I know it's fun. People love nasty reviews of restaurants more than positive reviews, and criticism can be exciting, but I really don't have any strong or substantial critiques. And I'll just say this. I loved, first of all, how clear it is, how well written it is. Journalists make the best writers. I love how you use both qualitative and quantitative methods. To me, that's a model. It's a model of how we should do social science. And I teach qualitative methods, and I always say to my students, we need both. We need to see these big pictures, this empirical data, these numbers, and then we need to flesh out the stories behind them. And so your book does that so beautifully, how you weave the qualitative and quantitative as well. And of course, the sensitivity to the broader picture of what's happening in terms of secularization in the United States. Fantastic. I so appreciated your attention to these really hot button and important issues of gay rights, race and ethnicity, gender, transgender, sexuality, and so on and so forth. So I really appreciated it. And more than that, and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but when I read your book, if I don't Google search you, I don't know where you're coming from. Are you a member of the LDS community? Are you an atheist? Are you secular? I mean, it's so even-handed. It's so fair-minded. It's such good, rigorous social science. So I commend you for your wonderful book. And sorry I don't have some scathing critiques, because those can be fun, but I just don't. I will say this conference, and this gets to the reading of your book as well, it occurred to me that with each slide that was presented this morning, I didn't know if collectively it was sort of sad news, because for me it was great news. And I was with each slide I was posting on Twitter, look, the Catholics are in decline, even the LDS is in. So sorry about that, but I wish there'd been maybe heart monitors, and every time you were maybe kind of being oh, what are we gonna do, and I was thinking what a great morning, so just to be quite honest to you, I do. So what happened was, when I read your book, I found myself making little arrows in the margin every time there was an indicator of religious decline in some way. And then I would make an arrow up if I saw there was any indication of increased religiosity in any level, the 3 Bs. And I have to say, the arrows beat out, the arrows going down beat out the arrows going up by 15 to 1. So, there were some, but it was really strong and interesting. And I recently wrote a blog piece about it for Psychology Today, which will hopefully go live soon. So to me, I see, I get excited. I think, wow, I have this stereotype, which Patrick always breaks for me, but the stereotype of the LDS community is, staunchly Republican. I believe that Utah was the state that most voted for Trump of all the 50 states. And I know, is that not true? Maybe Idaho? Oh, right. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, up there though. Top 5, top 10? Oh, I looked at something wrong the other day then. Sorry. Okay, thank you for that. Good to know. But I think of patriarchy, I think of sexism, I think of homophobia, I think of obedience to authority, I think of the hugely public crusade against gay marriage that was in this town and in my state that was so strongly supported by the Mormon Church. So when I read the book, I thought, wow, this is really great. On the other hand, I also recognize that there are aspects to religious culture that simply aren't there in secular culture. And so there, even though I can sort of maybe politically or my social justice meter gets happy to think that the LDS is in decline, my sense of what the LDS community does, of which I am very envious of and think is wonderful. So the high levels of social capital, the high levels of family support, the high levels of group solidarity, the high levels of taking care of each other when in times of need, the strong and impressive and global charitable networks. When I look at those things that I don't see the equivalent of in secular culture, right? In secular culture, I see high levels of individualism. I see breaking down of families, which may or may not be a good thing. I'm on the fence on that. But I see when individuals are having a tough time, they're often isolated and alone, and they don't have that communal support that just kicks in right away. I don't see the strong bonds across generations. So I actually think, well, on the one level, like the political part of me and the social justice part of me thinks it's nice to see this decline, but I will say as an outsider, I do worry. What will replace that? How are we going to, not just in LDS, but as religion weakens, what is going to replace it? What is going to bring, because there really isn't a secular, slip of the tongue, secular doppelganger there. It's not the same thing. That community, that heritage, those charitable structures, and so on and so forth. So I will say it wasn't that I was all thrilled. And I think that is the biggest question, or one of the biggest questions that those of us who study secular culture is what is going to replace that? And I don't think the prospects are, I'm not totally optimistic about the future of secular culture. I think in many ways we're going to see a lot of improvement on certain political issues and social justice issues, but in other deeper senses in terms of social capital and so forth, I'm not as optimistic as some of my hardcore secularist friends are. I did want to say, I'll watch the time. I did want to note, however, while I did appreciate the ways in which you linked so many trends in the LDS community with broader trends, I didn't think there was the emphasis on the internet. So there is one slight critique that I would have liked to have seen. And I just want to talk about that briefly. And I'll make one other point, then we can go eat. In my research on people who have dropped out of their religion, and I have interviewed some former LDS people, but mostly people from other faiths, the internet, and there's also Linda Lascala's work on this, and there's others, the internet seems to be a big factor in growing secularization. And which is interesting because it's just a tool. It's neutral. Anybody can use the internet for its purposes. Religion can use the internet. I think someone mentioned an app where you can look up LDS scripture or whatever. I mean, in other words, all the things that the internet does, it does for religious groups as well as secular culture or whatnot. And yet, study after study after study that I'm seeing is showing that religion is not a friend to religion and is actually contributing significantly to the erosion of religiosity. And I think it happens in three ways. So the first way is that when you are 30, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, if you were a 14-year-old member of the LDS church in Utah or Idaho or whatnot, and you were struggling with some aspect of your religious community or the teachings or the faith or any of the three Bs, that was a struggle you had to cope with in isolation. Who could you turn to? Who could you talk to? Could you talk to your bishop about your doubts? I don't know. Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. Could you talk to your parents who are so committed to their faith? I don't know. Now that same 14-year-old kid, within 2 minutes of returning from seminary class, is right online talking to other LDS kids who are having the same doubts, the same questions, the same struggles. They're talking to each other. They're creating community online. They're referring each other to different resources. And that is, again, not just the LDS. It's happening everywhere. And I think so that ability to create a community of doubters, of skeptics, of insecure people who are not so sure is bolstering the ability for that 14-year-old to say, oh, maybe I don't accept this anymore. And I've got a lot of people like me. I'm not alone, and I don't have to squelch that. That's number one. Number two, in the old days, 2 minutes. Okay, very quickly. Well, when I was in grad school or college, if I wanted to look something up about the LDS, let's say LDS history, I wanted to learn about Brigham Young, I would go to this place called a library, and I would enter Brigham Young somewhere, and it would give me a call number, and I would go to find a book about Brigham Young, and it would be on a shelf with other books about Brigham Young. So, I would just say, oh, there's a book on Brigham Young. There's a book on Brigham Young, right? Today, if I want to know something about Brigham Young, I don't go to the library. I enter the name Brigham Young in Google, and what comes up are things about Brigham Young that are laudatory, and immediately on the other side of the screen is something condemning Brigham Young or exposing Brigham Young or mocking Brigham Young. It's right on the same screen. So the internet is exposing younger people to critiques of their religious faith in a way that you could easily avoid in 20 or 30 years ago. And then number three, I think in just a more existential sense, the internet is sort of just perhaps replacing religion just by what it is and what it does and how it functions in our lives. And it's just making religion quaint. Last point I'm going to make, and I'll end here, the 3 B's. Belief, behavior, and belonging. We've seen a lot of data about, well, look, belief is still staying strong. These other things, people aren't doing as many behaviors and they're not identifying, but belief is still staying strong. To me, that aligns perfectly well with how I understand religion from a Durkheimian sense, which is, in fact, I would expect belief to be the last thing to fade. Because in fact, I see belief as derivative of our social life and not the other way around. And so in other words, it is the community, the congregating, the rituals that cement our affiliation, and then the beliefs are on top. In fact, somebody said something about where students learn what it is they believe in seminary. What do you learn? Fascinating. You have to learn what it is you believe. You're already on Team LDS. You don't even know what the beliefs are. You just know you're on Team LDS. Oh, and then you'll learn the beliefs. And studies show that children across in all religions, they know what they are before they know even the content of those beliefs. And that's exactly what a sociologist would expect. So my feeling is as behavior will be the first to fade, and that all those things that cement you to your community, once they start to fade, then there's always a nominal sense of belonging. It's my community. That will be second. Belief will be last. I think that's how it's going to play out. Of course, I could be wrong. And so thank you for listening, and it's nice to see you all, and appreciate it. Thank you for the wonderful book.
Though I hate to get between Dr. Zuckerman and food, we're going to open for questions, question and answers now. Anyone has any questions for our panelists?
I wanted to just fill in. You saw the reaction of the audience. No, Utah didn't go for Trump. They went for Trump, but not in large numbers. It's because there was a third-party candidate. Okay. So if you look at the percentage for Hillary, it was really low. But that's because if you had Trump and Evan McMullen. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Appreciate it. Otherwise. I'll just address that. With National Study of Youth and Religion data, to which I have access, when Mormons leave the church, they don't go anywhere else. When other people leave their respective faith tradition, they will often switch. They will migrate to another faith tradition. So that's not purely cut and dried, but Mormons who disaffiliate are much less likely to switch to another faith. So, and in a flat world, it's hard for hierarchical religions to survive, would be what I would say.
Could I just add one nuance to that? Because yes, that is what is there. As we're continuing to look at the survey data, with more things, Jen and I have moved on to look at the former Mormons and try to analyze what's going on with them and patterns there. We found that yes, that's exactly the case, that the majority of former Mormons now just don't affiliate with anything. But the key variable that structures that is where they live currently. Those who leave live in Utah or high Mormon areas tend to polarize in the opposite sense. They tend to just drop out of religion altogether, become, at least they say that they're less likely to believe in all sorts of things. Whereas if you're outside of those Mormon communities and places where you're not the majority, they tend to just kind of blend in with the rest of the American fabric in terms of joining and worshiping at the same rates largely as everybody else. So I think that's fascinating, and we're going to continue to look at that to try to, again, unpublished, not peer-reviewed yet, but that's an interesting preliminary tentative finding that I want to explore further. What is the effect of community pressures on your religious belief and practice when you're no longer part of the majority group?
I will say I did have a picture. On that note, I did have a picture of the ultimate Mormon leaderboard, and that was the president, the quorum of the 12 apostles, first presidency, right on down the line. That, in some ways, that is the ultimate leaderboard.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for